Junk DNA is a natural selection predicament for the evolutionist, and that's what we're talking about tonight, junk DNA. And well, first, it's very hard to talk about junk anything until you talk about before we had the technology for them to even suggest junk DNA. What did the evolutionists do before then? Many textbooks say the peppered moth, industrial melanism in England, is evolution. Well, if that's all evolution is, I believe. The dark-colored peppered moths actually were more camouflaged than the light-colored peppered moths. As a result, the birds could see them and eat them for lunch a lot easier. Natural selection means to pick or choose, to select from what is already there. Traits that were already there, genetic information that was already there. This process will never get you from copepod sort of things in the ocean turning into moths. It will never get you from monkeys turning into people. This process can't make one step in that. Natural selection may be able to explain the survival of the fittest, but it cannot explain the arrival of the fittest. How did we get moths in the first place is the question evolution claims to answer and can't and doesn't. Instead, they just go look at how the colors shifted. Before the magic of evolution, there were white moths and black moths. After the magic of evolution, there were white moths and black moths. That would happen if Darwin was wrong. It doesn't have anything to do with Darwin's theory. Natural selection is actually real, because natural selection just means survival of the fittest. And it's clear the fit survive. It's clear that the fit survive better. And it's always, the lions are always looking, the wild dogs are looking for those people at the pacemakers to eat them, because they're not as fit. So, I do listen during these things. And always, the evolutionists are picking up on something that we can see, and it is true, and then they'll say, now, just use your imagination to extrapolate way out here, and you'll see evolution's happening. Well, you have to use, it's like that little Barney the dinosaur says, let's use our imagination, and then that's what evolution is, just imagining. And so what they do is they'll take what we do know and they'll use it, but then they'll bank on people not only not knowing enough about this, but that we're never going to know. Again, like the Big Bang. We'll never know whether it's really true or not, but we're going with it. Gary Parker, Dr. Gary Parker, I was working with him in Lakeland, Florida one time, and he said to me, evolution thrives in the gray areas, in the dark areas, in the unknown and the uncertainties only. As soon as data, evidence, and observations roll in, then evolution just flees the scene, because now truth shows it not only is a iffy theory, we find out it can't be, at least not in this area, anymore. And so whenever we don't know stuff, the evolutionists just say, oh, well, the reason is because of this and this and this and this, until later, more evidence comes in, and in the past 7 years, more has happened in the past 70 years as far as new data. And guess what, folks? It's all gone our way. The creationists have a lot of unanswered questions. So do the evolutionists. But all the questions that have been answered, almost every time, they go our way. And we find out answers to questions that show evolution can't be true, or at least what they said about it, we now know it never was that way. So that's what, if you could pull up the first frame on the PowerPoint there, I'll start. You really can't teach science without Calvin and Hobbes. So here's a Calvin and Hobbes. He's named after two famous philosophers,
When you look at me, it's clear that my genes contain the evolutionary perfection of earthly DNA. I am the culmination of creation.
And Hobbes goes, with no tail? I don't think so.
Stop that. My butt doesn't need aesthetic enhancement.
But, of course, according to evolutionists, we did used to have tails. And they'll say, well, we lost our tails, see, but we still have a vestige of our tails, the tailbone. They keep calling it the tailbone. It's the coccyx. Now, the coccyx is at the bottom, the end of your spine, and as Dr. Dwayne T. Gish said, well, can you think of any better way to end the spinal column than this? And they said, it's a useless organ now. It's just a vestigial throwback from back in the day when we used to have monkey tails. It's just a vestige, a throwback thing, leftovers from experimental evolutionary things that happened in the past. It's a leftover. And so they called it a vestige. And the definition of a vestigial organ is one that has very little or diminished or no function at all. Well, now we found out that the tailbone or the coccyx actually has a lot of functions. You're using yours right now. You wouldn't be able to sit down comfortably without that there. And if you have to have it surgically removed for bone cancer, not only couldn't you not sit, but you couldn't stand comfortably for very long either. You're not comfortable in any position. Also, not to be too terribly potty-mouthed about this, but the muscles for controlling your rectum are attached and anchored to the coccyx. In other words, you couldn't hold back your poops. Also, the muscles for parturition or childbirth in females are anchored on the coccyx. You couldn't push out a baby. And so I was explaining this to a combined two high school biology classes in Venezuela one time, and the students started laughing. And I didn't really know why, because the Venezuelan sense of humor is a little different. So I thought I maybe said something that was funny to them. The reason they were laughing was their biology teacher, and of course any biology teacher that gets surgery tells the students all about it as part of the lesson. She had to have her coccyx removed for bone cancer, and the students were laughing because they're like, well, by golly, Mrs. So-and-so was right. Yeah, she had to have reconstructive surgery on her rectum so she could control her bowel movements, and she had to have a cesarean for the next baby she had because she couldn't push in childbirth. And she also was out of the room at the time because she couldn't stand in the room or sit. She had to go take a walk up and down the hall every once in a while to ease the pain, and it was the only class that ever explained this to where everybody knew, well, by golly, that's true. Dr. Jackson doesn't just make up this stuff. So the coccyx is extremely important. Now, you don't have any bones to hold in your guts in the front, but you have your abs, your six-pack or eight-pack or whatever you've got, that holds in your guts from the front. But in the back, you also don't have bones. Your rib cage ends way up here. So you've got a series of V-shaped muscles that go down and attach, guess where, to the back of the coccyx. And it's very important. And if you ever have troubles with those muscles, that lower back pain, it's all because of that, because it's not working as well as it ought to. But the coccyx is certainly not a useless organ. But there are many organs that the evolutionists said, well, other ones are throwbacks from when we used to be rats and worms and fish. And we don't use these organs anymore. They're just waiting to disappear, like our pinky fingers and our pinky toes. They're waiting to disappear. And I actually got this from an atheist website, these pictures of vestigial organs. I think the website is still up, but it would include the wisdom teeth, your tonsils and adenoids, the appendix, the bones here that are floating loose in the tissues of whales, which actually are where their reproductive organs and muscles for pushing out babies, calving, are located, and of course the coccyx, and there's that blind cavefish, which is a whole nother story. Now, these have all been debunked. Used to be when I'd talk at a university campus, the evolutionists would start talking about vestigial organs, or junk organs, organs that no longer function because in our evolutionary ancient past, they once had a function, but they're on their way out because evolution is sending them on their way out by natural selection. We don't use them anymore, so whenever something goes wrong with them, it either causes us problems or it just finally is fading away. In the 1930s, there were 180 body structures in the human body that were judged as vestiges, including the pituitary gland, which we now know is the master gland of the body and the endocrine system, an extremely important gland in the body. But you see, we couldn't figure out what it did in the 1930s. And since we're so smart, if we can't figure out what it does, it must not do anything. So that's the arrogance of the atheist evo-secular mindset, which says if we can't figure out, it must not be doing anything. Therefore, let's just say it's proof of evolution. These are leftovers from our evolutionary past, yes?
What's the common name for this?
The coccyx? Oh, what you're holding in your hand? Oh, the coccyx, the tailbone. You're sitting on your tailbone now. And if it's not very valuable, how many of you ever bounced down the stairs on your tailbone? How many of you ever bounced out? Okay, if that's not useful, why did God put so many nerves in it? Because, it really, really hurts. If you ever break that thing, it's extremely painful. And why would evolution innervate it so much if it doesn't have a function? You see, they got it coming both ways. The logic, the biology, the findings, and all these things, all those organs. Right now, there's no vestigial organ known in the body. Every single one of them, we finally found out what the purpose was. They don't talk about it anymore. They don't talk so big anymore. Well, what's an evolutionist to do? We now know enough to know that they can't just hypothesize and lie about it anymore. So let's move on to something new that they don't know enough about. And so they decided, even if we didn't have junk organs, we have junk genes, junk DNA. See, it turned out that 98% of our DNA, we had no idea what it was doing. And since we're so smart, okay, look at this. Half a century later, we do the same arrogant, stupid mistake again. Hope springs eternal in the heart of the evolutionist. So they're like, since 98% of the DNA, we don't know what it's doing, and we're so smart, it must not be doing anything. So it's just a holdover from back when we had worm DNA and rat DNA and fish DNA and monkey DNA. And so it's just trash leftovers from all the experiments evolution's done inside our bodies in the millions of billions of years and all that. And so it's evident proof, and you would have heard it in evolution biology class, proof, you idiot creationists, that evolution is actually the truth, you see. So talk about new unknown things that we didn't know about as proof of evolution. They did the same exact error in logic all over again for the same arrogant reason, like the reason Satan thinks he's going to win at the end of this thing. You know, the old I read the back of the book. I mean, he should have known at the beginning when he tried to take over heaven that it wasn't going to work that way. So they've turned to the DNA in our cells, the unknowns in the DNA in our cells, and it has been touted for 50 years as evidence of evolution. And we creationists have been called idiots for saying that, well, you know, I was actually discussing it with the Dean of Sciences and the Chair of Biology at Carson Newman College in Jefferson City, Tennessee, and Dr. Friels, the Dean of Science, said to me, well, Dr. Jackson, what about junk DNA? And I said, well, and he goes, you're going to say someday we're going to find a reason for it, aren't you? And him and Dr. Carr, the head of biology, laughed at me to scorn. But, well, in 1999, something happened. We'll get to that. Will Rogers, a humorist like Mark Twain, back in the Dust Bowl days, he said this from Oklahoma. He was an Okie. Scientists get bigger and bigger reputations the more they talk about things you can't check on. Yeah, like aliens and junk DNA. This is Marilyn Beausavant from the Guinness Book of World Records, the member of Mensa, like me, only she's the world record. I think somebody has beaten her since then, but she had an article, a column in Parade magazine called Ask Marilyn, because she was famous for being highest IQ alive. But look what she says. Be able to defend your arguments in a rational way. Otherwise, all you have is a what? Opinion. And that's okay. But don't put it in books and say people who don't hold the same opinion as you are stupid, which is what we get from the evolutionists all the time. Okay, 2007, Newsweek magazine, The Evolution Revolution. I told you, every once in a while these magazines put out a special Evolution's Gotta Be True issue. Every few years, all of them do it. Well, let's take a look at this. In 2007, look what it says. And they're talking about the new exhibit at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. As its exhibits show, humankind's roots are sunk deep in the East African savanna. There, the last creature ancestral to humans as well as chimps, and that would be the missing link, the last creature before the last monkey that changed into the first human, not the last monkey of all, but the last one in that family, because the rest of them in that family turned out to be us in their theory. Our closest living cousins, the last creature ancestral to humans and chimps, lived standing at a fork in the family tree as momentous as it is contentious. In other words, argued about. Now watch this. Watch what they admit in 2007. Fossils never resolved when the lineages split. They never found the missing. Newsweek admits it in 2007. But DNA might do it. The next hope of stuff we don't know enough about to know what we're talking about, where they're going to use that now. Human DNA and chimp DNA differ by no more than 1.2%. DNA changes at a fairly regular rate. That lets scientists use this rate to calibrate a molecular clock whose tick-tocks measure how long ago a genetic change occurred, based on many, many assumptions that even leading evolutionists realize is guesswork. But the point I want to look at is they were resorting now to DNA, junk DNA or junk genes. Vestigial genes, it's the very same exact logic they used 70 years ago. And so for 50 years, though, they've been throwing this junk DNA stuff at us in a very high-handed, high on their high horse attitude about it. And we have continued to maintain there's no such thing. God don't make no junk. It is doing something because your cells are busy making new copies of not only that 98%, but the 2% we figured out what it does, all of it, and passing it on to every cell in your body, all of it, and passing it on to the next generation. And why would evolution even do that? You know, it's a terrible waste of resources and energy if these are unnecessary vestiges. Not this kind of gene. I got that from my friend John Hefner in East Texas, the East Texas creationist. Have you ever met John Hefner at Carl's place? He's a very unusual and wonderful brother and creationist. Well, anyway, another Calvin and Hobbes.
A snow snake's got me.
How do you like that, Michael? Where's Michael here with the snow snake? It's fictional.
Horrible inner teeth on its separately moving upper jawbones are pulling me down its frigid gullet. Run for your life. At least I have a life, unlike some weirdos I know. I suppose if I had 2 X chromosomes, I'd feel hostile too. Because girls have 2 X chromosomes and guys just have an X and a Y. Now, it was in the X chromosome, which has more genes in it than any of the other chromosomes, where we found the first example of junk DNA doing something. This came out about 1999, the Washington Post. I didn't get the date on it, so I don't document it, but this is a scan from the Washington Post. Look at what it says up there. Let's see. First, it appears that strange sequences of DNA previously thought to be what? Useless are key to the inactivation process. Okay, here it is. Girls have 2 X chromosomes, guys only have 1. But if you actually used all the genes on both chromosomes, it would be a deadly pileup of extra genetic activity. So it's well known, it's been well known for a while, that on one of the X chromosomes, half of the genes shut down.
On the other X chromosome, the other half of the genes shut down. And on the ones where girls actually do need a double dose, those stay active on both chromosomes. But nobody knew, how does it know what to do? What is coordinating this very meticulous, computerized almost shutdown of just the right number of genes on both of the X chromosomes? They found out that there was a master control gene, a regulatory gene, that was partially hidden in the junk DNA. The reason we couldn't figure out what these genes were doing was they don't make proteins. It kind of leaves a genetic paper trail with all the proteins in your body. Every enzyme and hormone you've got is a protein. And of course, you know the cartilage in your ear and your nose, the pigment molecules in your hair, your skin, and your eyes are all proteins. Your fingernails are made out of proteins. So all the proteins that we were made of, we were able to trace when we cracked the genetic code back in the 1960s, we were able to trace these proteins back to the genes in our chromosomes that made them. But it only accounted for 2% of the genes. And so we couldn't figure out what the rest was doing. But it turns out these were the circuitry of the main circuit board, the motherboard of the computerized biological systems controlling all of the other genes. These were the genes that were telling all the other genes when to turn on. It's puberty, time for some more gene activity. It's cold outside. Every time you needed to regulate when another gene would turn on or off or crank it out and make extra amounts of protein, these genes were telling them what to do. They were the master control genes, the brains of the DNA, actually, the most important part. Now, they began to realize this in like 1999, started to get hints, there's like a faint smell in the room. You smell smoke? Our theory seems to be burning up. and so I was kind of gloating with I sent them emails about this when it came out. The human genome is more complex than previously thought, and this is very important. In new genetic science, we found out if one gene mutates so we can get a new wonderful trait, it'll probably destroy 5 other functions that come out of the same gene. The old one gene, one trait theory was starting to be knocked down back in the 70s. The idea that one gene controls each trait. No, one gene could control like 5 different traits. And it might take 5 different genes to cause one trait to work. That way, if you mess with any part of the system with a mutation or a slight change, it will change more than just that one thing. It'll change 5 or 20 other things. And not only that, but each trait needs more than just that gene to change. You would have to mutate the master control genes, and you'd have to mutate them just right, or the organism would die from all the other genes it controls too. In 2001, scientists were amazed that the human genome was reported to have only about 35,000 genes. We thought it'd be 140,000 because of how many different proteins we actually had, actually hundreds of thousands. So they were shocked. It turned out, after the Human Genome Project was complete, there were only 22,000 genes. They backed it up to a little 23, maybe 25,000, but it's still ridiculously. This vastly low number means the human genome is much more complicated than previously thought. It can do so much with so little. There must be layers upon layers of encoding, overwritings and overlappings, and nested within nested program code lines. There you go. Some of our computer guys, they're Joseph, Jacob, Matthew, and Isaac. Even Bill Gates said, our DNA is like an incredibly complex computer program, but far more sophisticated than anything we've ever been able to come up with. That's coming from Bill Gates. It turns out that genes can be read forward in the code on one gene within a chromosome, and backwards it codes for another protein. and three-dimensionally. The genes evidently perform multiple functions to direct the production of hundreds of thousands of components that comprise the human body. In 2004, the International Human Genome Sequencing Consortium further revised the number down to about 2,500,000, and this small number blows our socks off, they said. We have a long way to go to understand how all the parts revealed by the genome sequence together make life and all the proteins necessary. That's from Nature magazine, 2004. Professor Anthony Flew, in his 80s, decided he was a famous atheist, like Richard Dawkins, a big spokesman for the atheist community, and he said in 2004, I'm sorry guys, I can't be an atheist anymore. Look what it says. Leading atheist now believes in God. 2004, Professor Anthony Flew said this, what I think the DNA material has done is show intelligence must have been involved in getting these extraordinarily diverse elements together. The DNA was proof enough that this guy said, he didn't become a Christian, but he said, guys, I'm sorry, there's got to be a God. I can't be an atheist anymore. Look at the DNA. It is so marvelously and wonderfully made. This is Richard Sternberg, who got in so much trouble and kind of spurred on the movie, Expelled, Intelligence No Allowed. He was working at the Smithsonian Museum at the time. Look what he says. One day, we will think of what used to be called junk DNA as a critical component of truly expert cellular control regimes. 2005. But look what this evolutionist said also in 2005 in the Washington Post newspaper. I'm from Washington, D.C., and it's one of the leading newspapers in the world. Look at what this guy from Columbia University said. A lot of the DNA in there is not needed. It's junk. That's what evolutionists have always told us. If it's intelligently designed, then God needs to go back to school. Step back for the lightning bolt. The guy's going to get it. But even the same year he said that, the junk DNA illusion in urban myth was already crumbling to the ground, already on its way out. For in 2007, a series of international reports came out giving credence to the idea, you know what, guys, the junk DNA might not be true. An example of multitasking genes. The University of London, this is in 2006, Discover magazine said, discovered the CX26, a gene associated with deafness and hearing, also plays a role in helping wounds to heal. The same gene that enables you to hear enables you to heal cuts. That's multitasking. No wonder we don't need so many genes. You read it one way, not only can you read it forward and backwards, but genes get together and donate to each other different parts of the instructional code they're handling and then splice them together, sometimes pieces from 5 or more genes to make a new set of instructions to make a different protein. And somebody's got to be coordinating that cut and paste and pick and choose and then splice it together process, and it's the junk DNA that was doing it. Well, hang on, let me get to the point here. What about the junk DNA? We'll answer, well, it's possibly non-coding DNA that contains signals that decide when other genes are switched on or off. It's far more complicated and has far more coordinating instructions for all of the other genes around it. The master control genes, the Hox genes, the regulatory genes that actually their function is to tell all the other genes what to do and when to do it. Yeah.
Those like X and Y things, it said they had diseases. I was curious, are those literal diseases or like diseases that you catch or a different meaning?
Well, I'm not sure which diseases. There are all kinds of diseases you can inherit, that aren't actually from germs. And it's not necessarily a disease or an illness as much as it is just a disorder. Like if you inherited diabetes or a tendency for diabetes, and there are many things that can be inherited. Oh, male pattern baldness is inherited, but it's through the maternal line, the mother. So look and see if your maternal uncles are bald guys, and then you'll know whether you're headed that way or not. Okay. The non-coding region of the genome, once known dismissively as junk DNA, is crucial. And that was said in Time magazine in 2006 by Sean Carroll, a very famous spokesman for the atheist and evolutionist community. Time magazine, October 2006. Let's zoom in on this part of the article on the left. And it says, those molecular switches lie, this is 2006, in the non-coding. In other words, they don't code for making proteins, so we didn't know what they were doing. The non-protein making regions of the genome, once known dismissively as junk DNA, but lately rechristened the dark matter of the genome. That sounds smart, and it maybe sounds mysterious enough that maybe people won't notice this is a big fail for them. Much of the genome's dark matter is in fact junk. Yes, much of it is junk, the residue of evolutionary events long forgotten and no longer relevant. But a subset of the dark matter known as functional non-coding DNA, comprising some 3 to 4% of the genome and mostly embedded within and around the genes, is crucial. Coding regions are much easier for us to study, says Sean Carroll in his new book, because we could trace back the proteins to the gene they came from. 3 to 4%? No, it turned out to be much more in 2007. This is 2006. Svante Pavo from the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany, came up with this. He found out, and I'll look up close here, there's a gene called the FOXP2 gene, which controls your brain development, FOXP2. Well, most mammals have that gene, and our gene is only it produces a protein that is only 2 amino acids different from the protein in a mouse brain gene. And that 2 difference, it makes all the difference in the world. Well, okay, monkeys and mice have it too, but the monkey is only 2 amino acids away from us. Now, most proteins that you have in your body are 400 to 500 amino acids long, but just 2 being different, Svante Pavo said, was enough for our brains to be 3 times the size of a monkey brain and for us to be able to talk. And so Pavo said, gene sequences alone do not tell the story. There must be something else going on. It's hinting the junk sequences were doing something. Genes are amazingly complex and a real problem for the evolutionists to explain. For example, in 2002, the German evolutionist Svante Pavo found only tiny differences in the chimp versus human FOXP2 gene located in the so-called junk. It was a junk gene, but now they realized it was doing something. Let's see, that Evos say doesn't do anything, but it actually controls the speech center of the brain. Only a 2 amino acid difference between chimps and humans. That isn't really enough to make us talk and chimps mute. Pavo says it's gene expression that makes the difference, not the genes themselves. He said 10% of the human versus chimp genes studied are expressed at significantly different levels in the 2 species. In other words, our FOXP2 gene actually cranks out the protein a lot better than the monkey gene does. The same gene, we just activate it more. But how do it know to do that? Because the junk genes are the master control system of the entire coordination of the genome, the 2% that's actually making proteins. So a huge amount of the biological computer in your DNA is actually devoted to the timing and coordination of the activity and the extent of the activity of every other gene. Otherwise, you wouldn't be you. If anything goes wrong with that, well, you could have a brain the size of a monkey brain. And I wrote this part, actually. So for a new trait to evolve, you can't just have one gene mutate. The regulatory genes that control it would have to mutate too at the same time. This gets way too complex to even imagine how it could really happen just by luck. When it begins to become so many ifs, ands, and buts, and there's so many secondary assumptions that have to be made, and so many other coordinations that would be necessary for it to happen, it begins to approach the impossibility threshold, and you wouldn't bet a dime on it. But they were betting everything. Junk DNA. Look, 2007, Washington Post reported this the next year. The first concerted effort to understand all the inner workings of the DNA molecule is overturning a host of long-held assumptions, evolutionary assumptions, about the nature of genes and their role in human health and evolution. Scientists reported yesterday. The new perspective reveals DNA to be not just a string of biological code, like a string of beads on a necklace, but a dauntingly complex operating system that processes many more kinds of information than previously appreciated. Way more intelligently designed than they had ever hoped it would be. The findings from a project involving hundreds of scientists in 11 countries and detailed in 29 papers being published today confirms growing suspicions. Look what it says. The stretches of junk DNA flanking hardworking genes are not junk at all. They never were. It was always untrue, just like the junk organs. But the study goes further, indicating for the first time that the vast majority of the 3 billion letters of the human genetic code are busily toiling at an array of previously invisible tasks. We knew something had to be doing it. They were just hoping it wasn't that hero of evolution, the idle, useless junk DNA, the vestigial genes. But to their horror, it was. Now, I did this whole presentation at a community college, I think it was in Iowa, and some of the students told me that they heard some of the professors outside the lecture room who had been there listening to me, and they were all going, well, I guess we can't use junk DNA as proof of evolution in our classes anymore. Because I didn't cite, I like Dwayne T. Gish said, I've been accused, creationists are always accused of being selective in our traits and in our quotes and our things that we cite, and that's really true. I never quote creationists. We only quote evolutionists because the evolutionists won't believe it if we quote our journals, but they will if it's their own. Again, Washington Post, 2007. The new work also overturns the conventional notion that genes are discrete or separate packets of information arranged like beads on a thread of DNA. Instead, many genes overlap one another and share stretches of molecular code. As with phone lines that carry many voices at once, that arrangement has prompted the evolution of complex switching. They're trying to say, well, evolution did this. See how wonderful it is? But if evolution did it, and then evolution messed with perfection, it would de-evolve and only mess with the perfection. The contradictions, the dreamy thought life. In my day, they'd ask, what you been smoking? Switching, splicing, silencing mechanisms, mostly located between the genes in the junk, to sort out the interwoven messages. I know this is long, but every word of it is so important. And this is 2007. About 93% of the genome is transcribed, not 3%, as was expected. Who expected it to be only 3%? Who? The evolutionists expected it because they were going in good faith on Darwinian assumptions, Darwinian hypotheses, and Darwinian predictions. A theory like D. Russell Humphrey's is cash in the bank for a scientist if its predictions turn out to be true. But these predictions turned out to not be so true. Further study with more wide-ranging methods may raise this figure to 100%, that there's actually zero amount of the DNA that's just sitting around being leftovers from evolutionary experiments from the past. You can imagine when I first read this in 2007. It was party time. Let's break out the mac and cheese. And I was a teacher then too. Mac and cheese was party, okay. Because much energy and coordination is required for transcription. Transcription is when the DNA gives its coded message to the RNA, which then tells the cell what protein to make. Why would you go through all of the energy-expensive mechanical processes on the microscopic level of actually manufacturing these RNA molecules from DNA molecules if they were never going to do anything. 98%, 93%, probably 100% is all transcribed. And that probably the whole genome is used by the cell, and there is no such thing as junk DNA. Exons are not gene-specific, but are modules that can be joined to many different RNA transcripts. One exon, or one part of one gene, can be used in combination with up to 33 different other genes located on 14 different chromosomes. I mean, this is like you drawing half a picture and someone in Paris, France, draws the other half, and the system that you're coordinating without the internet, let's do postal mail, it communicates. Or maybe it is the internet. The junk DNA is the internet system. It's the World Wide Web in your nucleus. It's not useless. And now everybody knows it. The evolutionists have tried to save face, but they were horribly embarrassed again. This means that one exon can specify one part shared in common with many different proteins. There's no bead on a string linear arrangement. It's not that simple, but rather an interleaved structure of overlapping segments with typically 5, 7, 9 or more transcripts coming out of one gene. Different portions are being spliced and mixed and edited and combined by the junk sequences at their command. Not just one strand, but both strands. You see, DNA is a double helix. We used to think that one of them, we even call it the sense strand, and the other one is the antisense strand. In other words, it's just a placeholder. Now we found out all the DNA on the antisense strand, which is read backwards, actually is working hard too. See, we couldn't figure out what it was doing. And since we're so smart, it must not have been doing anything. So we called it the antisense strand. You will still see it called that in every biology textbook. The antisense strand. They called it that because they believed in Darwin, because they believed in the prediction of evolutionary worldview. Transcription proceeds, not just one strand, but both strands. Transcription proceeds not just one way, but both backwards and forwards. Transcription factors can be tens or hundreds of thousands of base pairs away from the gene that they control, way over on the other side of the nucleus. We still don't know how they communicate with each other from two opposite sides of the nucleus. This is probably way more complicated than even this suggests. We don't know how they coordinate with each other to talk to each other, to how to tell all the other genes what to do, and how this splicing process actually occurs. We know it does occur. We don't know how it's doing it yet. Let's see. There is not just one start site, because we used to teach at the beginning of a gene, there's the start codon and there's the stop codon, but there's lots of them really in between where the splice marks are marked. There is not just one start site, but many in each particular gene region. This is from Nature magazine and from Nature Reviews Genetics. 2007, Anthony Flew said, there were two factors in particular that were decisive in his decision to not be an atheist anymore. One was my growing empathy with the insight of Einstein and other noted scientists that there had to be an intelligence behind the integrated complexity of the physical universe. The second was my own insight that the integrated complexity of life itself, which is far more complex than the physical universe, can only be explained in terms of an intelligent source. There must be a brilliant, ingenious mind with a capital M behind all of this. There has to be an intelligent designer, and he's the one that made those capital letters, not me. Intelligent source. Now watch, this is funny. The best confirmation of this radical gulf between the physical world and the living world, and being so complex, is Richard Dawkins' comical effort to argue in his book, The God Delusion, that the origin of life can be attributed to a lucky chance. If that's the best argument you have, then the game is over. No, I didn't hear a voice. It was the evidence itself that led me to this conclusion. Guys, there's got to be a God. Give it up. Let's all atheists. Come on, let's just give it up. We don't know what this God is or anything, but evolution don't work, and there's got to be a God. This is Eric Lander, who's worked on many projects before, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and this is from the New York Times in 2006. Notice the article, "Far from junk DNA, dark matter proves crucial to health." It's crucial to your health matters. At least 4 million gene switches that reside in the bits of DNA once dismissed as junk, 4 million turn-on, turn-off gate portals in the instruction sequence and the analog processing system of your DNA. 4 million instruction portals, pivot points were in the junk DNA. They found them in the junk. Take that, Dr. Friels and Dr. Carr. They turn out to play critical roles in controlling how cells, organs, and other tissues behave. As scientists delved into the junk, parts of the DNA that are not actual genes containing instructions for proteins, they discovered a complex system that controls genes that do make proteins. Dr. Lander said, "My head explodes at the amount of data." This is the guy who said natural selection is the greatest tinkerer of all time. He's an avid evolutionist, but he now realizes there's no such thing as junk DNA. Now I want you to see another wave of international, worldwide reports of new research data came out 5 years later in 2012, and it was de coup de grace. It was the moment of truth. It was it. It actually killed in all the literature, for all the evolutionists on the planet, it killed the old junk DNA myth. But they never talk about the 50 years they screamed and laughed at us for saying, "You're going to say that someday we're going to find out what it's doing." Dr. Jackson. Well, I was denied tenure at his college, but yeah. Okay. Human DNA is a lot more active than we expected. Who expected? The evolutionists, because the predictions of the Darwinian precepts. A lot more active than we expected, and there are a lot more things happening than we expected. Look what it goes down here. He added, "I don't think anyone predicted that would be the case." Liar! We predicted it. The creationists were shouting for 50 years as loud as we could. You're going to find a function for the junk sequences, the non-coding sequences someday. Nobody predicted. They knew we'd been saying this for all this time. They knew it. They knew it. I'm sorry, he's lying to himself if he's not lying to everybody else. Nobody, I don't think anyone predicted that would be the case. It was our paradigm's prediction that this was going to happen, just like the magnetic field strengths of those planets that D. Russell Humphreys predicted. And NASA freaked because they did not figure it was going to go his way, but it did. Just like the Pioneer anomaly, but that's one I'll let you do. So here's what it's really like. These master control genes will tell a gene what to do. Or they could tell a gene what to do, who tells the other gene what's supposed to happen, who tells the other gene what's supposed to happen, that tells this one, finally, which protein to make. But they all put it through their filters first. They all add their tailoring to the message, to the instructions, to the timing of it, to the coordination of it. A gene that tells a gene that tells a gene that tells a gene that tells a gene what to do. And this one's telling many of them how to do that. Now, the master control genes are in the junk sequences. All of them are there. Well, okay, to a scientist and a biologist, this is like gloating time, laughing time, and vindication time. Thy vindication shall shine forth as the brightness. As the brightness. 2012, again, the shadowy part. This is from the Washington Post again. Look what it says. Junk DNA concept debunked by new analysis of human genome. 2012. It just gets worse for them every year. I love it. Because I did pray that God would glorify himself and show his word to be true, and that is what it is. That is what it is. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. The shadowy part of the human genome, once disparaged as junk DNA, a view radically at odds with what biologists have thought for the past 3 decades, 97% of the human genome that's not strictly speaking made up of genes. The Encyclopedia of DNA Elements Project, nicknamed ENCODE, the identification of about 4 million sites involved in regulating gene activity. Previously, only a few thousand such sites were known. Now, 4 million. In all, at least 80% of the genome appears to be active at least sometime in our lives. Further research may reveal that virtually all the DNA passed down from generation to generation has been kept for a reason, and look what Richard Myers of the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology in Alabama says. The concept of junk DNA is really not accurate. It's an outdated metaphor. It's gone now. It's gone. But for 50 years, you know, the Piltdown Man fossil sat for 40 years in the Royal Museum of London. Generations of students saw it, and it was said it was the missing link. Generations of students rejected God, accepted evolution, rejected the Bible. For if you can't believe Genesis, why should you believe Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? If you can't believe that God made the heavens and the earth, Bareshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. If you can't believe that, then why should you believe? And I love what Billy Graham said. There's a man, Jesus Christ, dying on a cross 2,000 years ago, and you're going to tell me he changed my life? Don't kid me. Don't kid me. That's like what Malcolm Smith said. What we have appears to be manna in the wilderness, but it's white fluffy stuff that nobody knows what it is or understands it. The word manna in Hebrew means, what is it? They never did figure out what it was. But it's there, and it's real, and it's doing, and it's working, and it's a mystery, so well if we don't understand it. The faith is truly placed in the right place if it's vindicated in the end like this. And if every 21 things the Bible got right ahead of time, you know what? On the things we can't check on the Bible with, since it's been right about everything else we've been able to check on, why not go with the track record? Why not trust it? There's a friend who has never lied to you, never caught him in a lie, and they finally need for you to trust them. They've got a good track record. A good track record. The concept is an outdated metaphor. Now it's gone, and they're pretending they never threw it in our faces. But you know, and I know, and I'm telling you. Jeffrey Schwartz, a kind of renegade evolutionist at University of Pittsburgh, in an article in 2007 called Do Molecular Clocks Run It All, said this: the history of organic life is undemonstrable. Can't be demonstrated. I'm always looking at you, David, there. See, I do listen. We cannot prove a whole lot in evolutionary biology, and our findings will always be what? Which is an educated guess. There is one true evolutionary history of life, and whether we will actually ever know it is not likely. It's the Big Bang thing again. They just hoping and wishing and believe, and you just click your heels together, you'll get back to Kansas. You know, if you believe in fairies, then clap your hands. Tinkerbell will get well. If you clap your hands, I'm sorry to make fun, but they've been making fun of us for all this time, and now they know. They know. Egg on the face. Most importantly, we have to think about questioning underlying assumptions. Whether we are dealing with molecules or anything else, what are the underlying assumptions? That the Darwinian posit was true. And based on all those assumptions, now they're running into catastrophe, calamity after calamity after calamity. And what causes these disasters is data, evidence, facts, observation, science, real science. Not vain imaginations, but real science is destroying evolution. So the Altenberg 16 got together and decided to come up with something past the modern synthesis of Darwin called genetic plasticity. And Massimo Pigliucci, the head of the Darwin Coalition, and used to teach at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and is now at SUNY, the State University of New York campuses. But he came up with this, and the Altenberg 16 created a new version of evolution that has nothing to do with fossils and has nothing to do with DNA. I guess it's magic and miracles. They believe in miracles without believing in God. I told the Atheist Club at University of Texas, El Paso. It took 5 hours, but I got them to admit they believed in miracles too. Okay, the Big Bang violates all these laws of science, including the first and second laws of thermodynamics. And Isaac Asimov said the second law of thermodynamics is the most powerful generalization about the universe mankind has ever been able to come up with. In an article from Smithsonian Magazine called "In the Game of Energy and Thermodynamics, You Can't Even Break Even." He said it's the most powerful law we've ever discovered. And the Big Bang goes against it, and goes against the first law of thermodynamics as well, that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. So I told them, I said, you believe in miracles, you believe the Big Bang goes against all the laws of science. You believe in the origin of life, which goes against all the laws of biochemistry. And then you believe in how that one little bacterial cell, if we give you that, it then went against everything we know in genetic science and became giraffes and cheetahs and blue whales and pterodactyls and owls and people and hamsters. Did you know that the growth hormone in a hamster is the same molecule as in a blue whale? God has a sense of humor. Jesus had a sense of humor. Remember? Boanerges, the sons of thunder. What do you think, guys? Should we call fire down from heaven to kill these people because they didn't like us? Will you stop that? It said that Jesus, ever after then, when they suggested that they call down fire from heaven to, like Elijah did, it said ever after that, Jesus called them that. It was a running joke in this group of 12 friends that were the most amazing group that Jesus picked out of the most ordinary men he could find. And then they became Peter, the rock of the church, John, the divine, these people whose lives and deaths were legendary and powerful. They tried to martyr John, and they couldn't. The church history says that he survived boiling in oil, so they decided, we can't kill him, let's exile him. These people turned the world up. They that have turned the world upside down have come here too. And when we came to the world of science, which used to be run by creationists, they're scared of us. They're scared of truth because we will not have this man to rule over us. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Romans 1 says, they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, and so God gave them over to a reprobate mind, and their foolish hearts were darkened. My biology colleagues, the professors in all the universities, learning what I call God Appreciation 101, how the universe works, how life functions, everything we've been able to figure out, everything about, as Isaac Newton said, thinking God's thoughts after him is all that science is. Worshiping the Creator, like you can admire Bob Ross, now he's gone, by looking at one of his paintings. But the Creator's still here. How dare they? How dare they deny the genius, the beauty, the creation of the universe was an unthinkably brilliant and magnificent act of love. That's right. Somebody doesn't want me to talk. And power and genius, intelligence beyond compare. Even Richard Dawkins, the atheist, said, and I wish more pastors would say this,
If there was a God, he would have to be so far above us that merely conceptualizing him would be madness.
I think the atheist is right. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. His ways are higher than our ways. He's the unimaginable, unfathomable. Who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor? Who has ever given to God that he should repay him? He's endless, and I love him that way. I wouldn't have it any other way. Richard Dawkins would make an awesome Saul of Tarsus to Paul the Apostle conversion. Pray Richard Dawkins gets saved. He is not a hypocrite. He will stick to his atheist worldview, and he will stick to what it means. He said,
I know it won't be very popular to say this, but Hitler really got it right, you know. In natural selection, any group that can't defend itself deserves to be eliminated. And, well, boy, a lot of people didn't like that, but if you really, really are a Darwinist, don't forget his book, The Origin of the Species. That's only the short version. The title goes on the origin of the species by means of natural selection of favored races in the struggle for life. And Darwin believed that, of course, his race, you know, not the Aryan race, what am I thinking of? The English, whatever, the British, would outcompete all the other races and they'd all go extinct one way or another. And Hitler believed that about the Aryan race. Everyone thinks their race is the master race, but you know what the Bible says? There's one race, the human race. All men are of one blood. And there's no room in the Bible for the idea of race. Families, nations, yes, people groups, and there are wonderful gene pool differences, but the idea of race is always condemned by the Bible. Jesus talked to a half-blood Jew, a Samaritan. You weren't supposed to talk to Samaritans, so he made one of them the hero of one of his parables. I mean, Moses' brother and sister, Aaron and Miriam, got so mad at him for marrying an Ethiopian. Even today, Ethiopians are known as the darkest dark-skinned people on the planet, and Moses married one. And Miriam and Aaron got mad. And I heard one preacher say, well, they liked white so much, God gave them a little bit more of it. And he smote them white, leprous as snow. And they had to, not till Moses prayed for God to forgive them would the leprosy go away. There's just so much that's true, that's moral, that's ethical, that's logical, that's consistent. Streams of independent thinking truths that never crisscross each other in parallel lines forever. That's pure thought. That's the thinking of God. That's how it works. I think I do need to end in a moment. John Sanford is one of my heroes. He's a biologist. When I read his book, Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome, I was reading it, going from speaking gig to speaking gig in the car. My wife was driving, and it got tears because it brought together so many of the biological things. Dr. Sanford was an atheist. John Sanford with a Bachelor of Science in Horticulture from University of Minnesota, 76, Master of Science in University of Wisconsin, 78, and a PhD in 1980 in plant breeding and genetics from University of Wisconsin. A prolific inventor with over 25 patents in biology, 1986 to 1999 professor at Cornell, an adjunct professor of botany at Duke, was an atheist. When he got out of graduate school, Dr. Sanford said when he started doing research in biology, he found out none of the stuff that he had learned about evolution could be applied to real biology. So he realized evolution couldn't be true. He invented the gene gun technique for the genetic engineering of plants. A Distinguished Inventor Award, twice from the New York Patent Law Association, founded 2 companies that are biotechnology, later became a born-again Christian and founded the Feed My Sheep Foundation. I got to meet John Sanford at a Creation Ministries International Super Conference in North Carolina, and he was already my hero, and he and I both got there early, and we sat in rocking chairs in Black Mountain, North Carolina, and talked for 2.5 hours. And I picked his brain the whole time. It's usually the other way with me. I was delighting in this brilliant and accomplished, famous man of science who the evolutionists are so angry he's become a creationist, and a
1,000-year young earth creationist at that. And at the end of our time, Dr. Sanford asked me, well, Dr. Jackson, can I ask you a question? I went, well, I sure owe you. Yeah, sure. He said, you travel all around the country, college campuses and churches and groups all over the country. You debate and everything. He said, I don't do that so much. Do you think there's hope for this generation? I said, yes, I do, Dr. Sanford. And he said, well, is it happening in 1,000 little places or in big revivals around the country? I said, it's 1,000 little places, little pockets, little places where we see miracles. I saw a miracle today. I did. He is still at work. There he is. He's hiding there. God is still working in 1,000, in 1,000,000 places in lives. I got saved during the Jesus Freak revival, maybe the last of the great revivals in our country, but there's an underground revival happening like this sort of thing here. This generation does have hope. I got to pray with Dr. Sanford. I get to meet the most wonderful people. But when I first started creation ministry, all I kept running into were evolutionists. Kenneth Miller, Massimo Pigliucci, Michael Roos, and I was palling with these guys and talking with them, and they were weirded out that I would be the only creationist in a group of 1,000 evolutionists at the Darwin Day Festival. Hey, Dr. Cruzan, just wanted to see what you all were doing today. He wouldn't even speak to me. The vice president of the Darwin Coalition, he didn't even know what to say. He froze up. Didn't think I would come. Spying on what they're doing. Dr. Sanford rejects Darwinism. Let's see. I wasted so much of my life arguing about things that don't matter. In his book, he said, modern Darwinism is built on what I will call the primary axiom, the idea that man is merely a product of random mutation plus natural selection. A constantly mouthed mantra repeated endlessly on every college campus. The primary axiom is actually an extremely vulnerable theory. In fact, it is essentially indefensible. Its academic invincibility derives mostly from bluster, smoke, and mirrors. The axiom is held up by an almost mystical faith which true believers in evolution have in the omnipotence of natural selection. Professor Sanford says he now has a very strong conviction the primary axiom is most definitely wrong, and I say it out loud, the emperor has no clothes. He talks more about the complexity of the DNA and the cells in your body, and I'm going to try and wrap it up here. Instead of junk DNA, most or all of the genome is now known to be functional, and much of it appears to be written in both directions. So it is doubly functional. The first time I heard about this kind of thing was in Dr. Sanford's book about the overlaid and nested within nested codes. It becomes increasingly clear that most or all of the genome is functional, therefore most or all mutations have got to be harmful. Even as we cannot create life, we cannot defeat death. I assert that there is one who did create life and who designed the genome. He is called the author of life. I believe the author of life has the power to defeat death and degeneration. I believe that is the good news. It's my personal belief that Jesus is our hope. This is Dr. Sanford speaking, a world-renowned geneticist turned creationist and still a world-renowned geneticist. I believe that apart from him there is no hope. He gave us life in the first place, so he can give us new life today. Because he rose from the dead, we can be raised from death, even the death that is already enveloping us. It is a hope that has withstood the attacks of time and the corruption of religion. It is a hope freely given to anyone who would receive it today. In conclusion, Dr. Sanford says on page 155 of his book, I humbly put before you this alternative paradigm for your consideration. Jesus is our one true hope, our brother in the Lord Jesus Christ, Dr. Sanford. And there's contact information for for my ministry efforts and the little YouTubes that Dr. Falling was talking about that I do. I will say in my last minute that I think you must indeed consider yourself to owe the Lord something, not because I'm here, the other speakers, but God has actually assembled you at an appointment, at a moment in eternity, and we'll all be talking about this. I said to a few people, look, 10,000 years from now, my mansion, barbecue, let's all come here. We'll talk about it, and we'll look back and go, you know, his timing as ever was perfection. He is so beautiful and perfect, the way we wish we could be, the ideas we wish we could come up with. You know, Dr. Gish explained all of the changes that happen inside of a cocoon with a monarch butterfly, and he goes, that's amazing. I wonder who thought of that. Well, be encouraged in your faith, my brothers and sisters, and be grateful to the Lord God that we have all come together, and all of these different ministers, and even as you minister to one another, it's all for the edification of all and the building up of each other in our most holy faith. In Jesus' name, amen.